So this month, Mary and Jokai and I wanted to spend some time with the Brahmaviharas. And the Brahmaviharas are the divine abidings that the Buddha taught as a refuge and a practice. And there are four forms of love. And the first is metta, which I'm going to be talking about today, which is often translated as loving kindness. And then there's karuna or compassion, which is the form that love takes when it meets suffering or pain in the world. And then there's mudita or appreciative joy, which is the form that the energy of love takes when it encounters joy and happiness in the world. And finally, there's this very subtle but very deep form of love called equanimity or upekkha, which is the balanced sort of love that keeps us able to be responsive to the joys and the sorrows in life without being overwhelmed. So we'll talk about each of these week by week. And this week, I'm going to focus on metta. And so what is metta? What is love in the context of the Buddha's teachings? So if it's true, as the philosopher Erich Fromm wrote, that love is the only sane and satisfactory response to the problem of human existence, love is the only sane and satisfactory response to the problem of human existence. So if that's true, definitely bears some exploration. And even if it's just possibly true, then love really deserves some attention and exploration for sure. And in the Buddhist teachings, the cultivation of love is actually integral to our path. It's built into the Eightfold Path as part of our wise intention or wise thought, and it's essential to our growth and our well-being. And so we sometimes use the word metta as kind of an umbrella for these four heart qualities. And that's fine. It's really the framework of the full heart, of the wise and mature heart and the responsive heart. So we talk a lot about metta in this stream of Buddhism, and our Sangha has a Friday metta practice group that I know I see many familiar faces from, and it's open to everyone. You're always welcome if you want to give it a try. And so why is metta important, in the shift of consciousness toward freedom and ease? And how do I relate to the practice of love when it seems difficult or when I'm experiencing maybe even aversion to that practice? So I want to once again stress the importance of it, and this is a passage from Bhante Gunaratana, who's a Sri Lankan monk and a wonderful teacher, and he writes, "Without loving friendliness or metta, our practice of mindfulness will never successfully break through our craving and rigid sense of self. Mindfulness, in turn, is a necessary basis for developing loving friendliness. The two are always developed together. So these are closely woven. It's like twin rails of the railroad track. Both are essential for our movement toward freedom and liberation." And so, this word that we use, metta, is a Pali word, the language of the Buddha's teachings, and it's translated lots of different ways: friendliness, loving kindness, loving friendliness, or even just friendliness, or even just love. But most simply, it's the heartfelt wish for the well-being of oneself and others. And so in a very simple way, it's just caring and wishing well, and caring enough to do that. So my first experience with metta practice happened on my first 7-day residential retreat. And I was brand new to retreat practice, and I was pretty new to practice in general, and I had no idea what a silent retreat was going to be like, no idea what to expect. I just felt this call of the heart. And I was somewhat surprised by this daily practice, metta practice, that the teachers introduced. We did it every evening. And we practiced with these phrases, much like the ones I offered. May I be safe. May I be protected. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I care for myself with ease. And then we were taught, as is the traditional practice, to offer these wishes first to ourselves, then to loved ones, friends, strangers, all beings, and even enemies. And I was intrigued and also somewhat dubious. Is this meditation? I wasn't quite sure that, this was what I thought the practice was about. It kind of snuck up on me. And, my goal was to just get super quiet and super concentrated and get enlightened in 6 days. That didn't quite happen. And since then, I've practiced with metta on every retreat I've been on, and some retreats I go on, that's the whole practice, is this practice of the heart. And I include it in my daily practice. But it took some time before my resistance to it settled, and I started to really value it and see it as integral to the path, that matching rail to mindfulness. And I've learned that, that's pretty normal. Often in groups, people express their resistance to the practice, to the metta practice. And sometimes some people that I've met who seem to be the most full of love and care actually have some aversion to the practice. And some of my friends who teach metta, struggle with the practice of it. And I've had my struggles with it too. And in fact, it wasn't until I'd been teaching our weekly online metta group for about a year that I really noticed its effects. We started this in 2020 during COVID. And I really noticed, this is changing me. This practice is really having an effect. My default responses are shifting. I could really see that this regular practice was changing me, reconditioning me, creating these new neural pathways that we talk about, or as the Buddha might say, I was learning new ways of inclining the mind. And so I started to see that where my initial reaction to experiencing difficulty with someone, or even self-judgment, self-aversion, started to shift from sort of an automatic annoyance to, this is what I've been practicing for. Can I hold this person? Or can I hold myself with care? May you be well. May you be at ease. May we be easy together. So in one of the suttas, the Buddha says, whatever kinds of worldly merit there are, and he's talking about there's a long list of sacrifices that some ancient kings made, huge sacrifices. And whatever kinds of worldly merit there are, all are not worth 1/16th part of the heart deliverance of loving kindness. In shining and beaming and radiance, the heart deliverance of loving kindness, or metta, far excels them. And really, this sort of cultivation of the heart appears in many of the world's wisdom traditions. It's the agape of Christianity. It's the chesed of Judaism. It's the ishq of Islam. And, and it's part of our popular culture too. It's part of the received wisdom of being a human being, that love is valued, love is important. We know this. So I want to read part of the Buddha's most famous teaching on metta to kind of show where he taught from. And it's from the Karaniya Sutta, and I'll read part of it. And if you want to look it up later, you just Google Metta Sutta, and it will appear, Metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied. And then here's the practice. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. So those are the Buddha's instructions. Cultivate the mother heart, radiate kindness, include all beings, keep this awareness always in our hearts, no matter what we're doing. This isn't a me making kind of kindness or care. It doesn't seek to control or to own or to fix. It's a spirit of friendliness and care that we give with no thought of return, a simple gift. And it has a beautiful, warm, universal flavor. On one retreat, I was contemplating metta, and I stood at the edge of a field at sunset, and I had my eyes closed, and I just had that, that incredible golden glow that came through my eyelids, and just this beautiful, warm, bathing golden light. And I thought, yeah, that's what metta is. It's that kind of radiance, freely given, expanding, impartial, shining on all beings without exception and without preference. And metta is taught as a training because it helps us experience ourselves less and less as separate beings. It starts to break down the clinging, fearful sense of the separate I and me and mind. And it's not possible to have a mind of love, of openness, of acceptance, and a mind of fear and hatred at the same time. Those mind states don't arise together. And one of those mind states is going to allow us to see more deeply and be more open to reality. One of those mind states is going to lead us to liberation and freedom. So we incline the mind toward kindness over and over until it becomes a habit of mind. Remember Nelson Mandela that I read before the meditation period. If we can learn to hate, we can be taught to love. We can be taught to love. And we have all kinds of schools and institutions to learn the ways of the mind, but not so very many resources that are devoted to the teaching and learning and practice of love. So this practice of metta, of loving kindness, can be very creative. Imagery, words, poems, visualizations. But the most common way is by using phrases like we used as we ended the meditation period. And the usual invitation is to come up with simple phrases that work for you. And knowing that the phrases are a bridge. Metta is a heart practice. It's about the language of the heart, which is felt. So it's not ultimately about words at all. But we can use the phrases as a support, as an inclining the mind. And then we offer these friendly wishes to ourselves, a benefactor or a dear friend, a neutral person, difficult person, and then to all beings. That sense of radiating is just baked into all of the heart practices. And so we start off with these beautiful intentions and the support of a practice that's been recommended for more than 2,600 years. It's a practice that predates the Buddha. And then what happens? Well, it might be that we experience a beautiful opening of the heart, maybe feel some warmth in the chest, or a sense of connectedness or lightness, or a feeling of generosity, joy, healing. Or maybe something else shows up, and maybe I don't like that. Maybe doubt or anger or vulnerability. Sometimes even beautiful experiences can set up resistance. My friend Jim described it this way: this feels so good, I think I'll stop. I'm not supposed to feel this good. Something's wrong if I do. I've had that feeling. But whatever comes up is okay. We often latch on to the ideal. Meditation should be like this, or metta should be like that. And then when it isn't, it's not okay. We failed, or the practice failed us. The attitude that we bring to the practice of love is love. The attitude that we bring to the practice of love is love. So, if anger comes up in the metta practice, or doubt or vulnerability, this is wonderful information because I'm seeing what's there. And then can I relate to that with friendliness, kindness, or at least acceptance? And it's important to, when we do this practice, it can feel sometimes very good and almost seductive to just plug into love as sort of just this impersonal energy. And it is impersonal in the sense that it's shared. We share it with all beings. But we share it with all beings, like real beings, just like us. So it's not a transcendent sort of love that bypasses the difficulty in the world and the difficult people in the world, and that we can just, sort of take refuge in and ignore all the people that we don't get along with. I can love everyone, sure, but sometimes that feels a little like an abstraction. And everyone is made up of many individual beings, some of whom I get along with, some of whom I don't. So the question for me when I'm offering that love is like, can I really feel that sort of mother love, or a spark of that mother love for every being, for all beings? And if not that sort of level of love, can I wish them well? And if not wishing well, can I just accept their humanity and their right to be who they are? So doubt is another hindrance to practice, all the practices that the Buddha identified. And it came up for me right at that very first retreat when I was learning metta. Like, what is this practice? Are we praying? Who are we praying to? Is this a cult that I didn't know about? Is this like an affirmation or something? How is this Buddhism? For me, the metta practice is very much about cultivating this open and connected heart, but it's more than that. It's a training that can show me the places that aren't open yet. It might throw into relief the energies that are blocking my experience of freedom, the places that need to be warmed and loved and seen and loosened. And there are all kinds of wonderful stories of people doing metta practice, and they suddenly get a call from somebody they've been estranged from for 10 years, and they've been offering metta to that person, or safety from harm, or improvements in relationship. But we don't practice for those kind of results. It's lovely if they happen, but why we do this practice is to soften our own heart, and that softening informing how we relate to self and others. So if prayer is offering good wishes, then metta is prayer. But we aren't asking for something, we aren't begging for something, we aren't even affirming something. We're simply offering the greatest gift that we have, the gift of our hearts. And to me, the energy of metta is so unlike an affirmation. I'm not taking anything, I'm not claiming anything. Not that there's anything wrong with doing affirmations, but in this practice, I am simply offering. So it's really a practice of generosity and some receiving when we offer metta to ourselves. May you have whatever you need to be healthy, safe, well, and at ease. And it's like the wind sticking to nothing, like the warmth of the sun, freely, fully offered. And another place where I have felt resistance to metta practice is that it brings a sense of vulnerability with the tender-heartedness, with the opening and softening of the heart. Culturally, and in my family and my socialization, with the gender norms that I grew up with this message that being freely loving is weak, and that you don't want to do that. You need to be tough and strong. The message was that feelings weren't strong, love wasn't strong, sensitivity wasn't strong, or it was only appropriate in very, very limited circumstances. But if I'm generally loving, I'll be taken advantage of, or bullied, or hurt, or put down. And I was. And I'm sure many of us have had that experience. And we may notice when we do this metta practice a softening, a tenderness of the heart, and that may not feel okay because of the messages that we've received from the dominant culture. And I believe that we all come into this world with a heart of love. That's our natural heart. And then it gets bruised and brushed aside and jostled by the conditions of life. And maybe we endured harsh speech or violence or loss or grief. And maybe we had to protect ourselves from that pain. And one of the ways we might have done that is closing off this wellspring of love, of vulnerability, by protecting it a little too well. Maybe we needed to. Obscuring a treasure because we don't yet know how to hold it in safety, and no one is teaching us. So I remember where this crystallized for me very young. And I remember when I was 6 or so coming across a sweatshirt in a dresser drawer that I knew that I'd worn when I was a toddler. And so I was 6 and I was just learning to read, so I could see for the first time what the sweatshirt was saying. And the message on the shirt was, "I love everybody." And I felt embarrassed and ashamed by it, that I'd ever worn it, even at that young age, because I knew that it wasn't a safe message. It marked me as weak, as feeling, as sensitive, in danger. And so then the question arises now, as I practice metta, is it okay to have an open heart now? Is it safe? So, a couple of tips for working with metta that I've found helpful is first, remember it's creative. The sense that what you want to do is develop and encourage that warm, loving feeling. However you do it is okay. If you want to think of kittens to get that going, you can. If it helps you to think of a divine being, you can do that. If it's something that's just very close at hand for you all the time, go there. But go where it's easiest, particularly at the beginning. And it could be just sitting outside, feeling the breeze and sounds of birds, and nature allows the heart to open. And if you're working with that category of the difficult person, it may not feel possible or sincere to offer wishes of well-being for that person. And so if that happens, notice that and ask, is it possible to simply refrain from wishing them any harm? And it's interesting to notice what happens then. Sometimes I ask myself, if I'm not really able to offer this difficult person metta, do I wish them harm? It's an interesting inquiry. Dipping in and dipping out. So when you do this practice, if it feels difficult or working with a certain person or yourself feels difficult, come back to the body, come back to the breath or contact or sound. And judgment. We can have a lot of self-judgment in practice. And it comes up in metta practice too. So, I sometimes ask myself, what would this moment be like without judgment? What is this moment like without judgment if I let the judging voices settle? Sometimes when the judging mind is very strong, I do a kind of metta practice where I offer myself the absence of certain energies. May I be free from self-judgment. May I be free from self-criticism. May I be free from self-doubt. May I be free from self-reproach. So maybe not even wishing the opposites, the positives yet, but may I be free from self-judgment. And something that can be very helpful when you do these practices too is reflecting that somewhere in the world, in every moment, there is someone offering you metta, including you in all beings. So we are always being offered metta and love in the world. And if it's hard to offer metta to yourself, that's also really good information and an invitation to inquire. Sometimes it helps to see yourself as you were as a child, offering a child you metta and care, or remembering a moment when you were deeply happy and contented. And then letting the practice do its thing. I don't have to make the practice work. I only need to let it and have some faith that it does work. The loosening, the softening, the unfolding happens in its own time. When a hard, dried sponge is placed in water, it's not necessary to do anything at all. Just wait. The presence of water is enough. The fibers and capillaries gradually open and fill and soften. So I want to offer this reflection to this experience. So this happened a few years ago when David and I were coming back to Palm Springs through Sedona, and we visited this really beautiful Buddhist garden shrine above the city, and there were beautiful red rocks and pines and deep blue skies. And in the center was a stupa, religious monument, and I did some practices. I took refuge and I circumambulated it. And then I sat for a while and I enjoyed the sense of stillness that you sometimes can really feel in sacred places where a lot of practice has happened. And I could really feel it there that day, even though there were lots of people and tour groups even and activity. And after a while, I got up and I explored the other pathways, and I came upon this large and beautiful carved wooden Buddha, and it's maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. And there was this a little tiny bench in front, and someone was already sitting there. So I stood to one side. I thought, well, I don't want to crowd this person, and there isn't really room for another person. So I just stood and kind of felt what it was like being in the presence of this beautiful image. And then the figure on the bench scooched over just a little bit, just a hair, and offered me to sit with an opening gesture of her hand. Not a waving toward or anything or saying anything, just an offering, inviting me without words to join them, to join the Buddha and this person. And so I sat down and I took in the moment, the Buddha, the air, my body, and the person I was sitting next to. A neutral person. This is one of the categories we practice with. I didn't know her or them. We didn't speak. And I didn't take in more than, I think she was wearing light-colored pants, had darkish hair, seemed somewhat stooped, resting hands on a cane placed between her knees. And I felt something. I really felt our hearts connect. And so I just wished her metta and compassion and joy and health and ease and well-being. And I really, really felt it. And I didn't look over. I didn't sort of want to break down or intrude in some way, but I knew she could feel me the way I could feel her. So I don't know if, she looked over at me, but there we were in the Buddha's presence, in the presence of love, a field of love that we were creating together. And this is sort of the thing that always gets me. This is part of what makes metta so incredibly powerful and rich, is that if we want more love in the universe, we can create it. And so then after maybe 5 or 10 minutes, I got up and I bowed to the Buddha and I continued down the path. And I didn't look back, but I could feel our connection and how this neutral being had become a beloved being through the practice of metta. And for a while after that experience, I could still feel it very vividly, sort of the felt sense in the body. And as I remembered it, I saw myself focusing on the love that I felt for her, as though that was what was so remarkable. And then I realized, no, it was her act, that simple scooching over, the welcoming of the moment that she offered. That's what had truly touched my heart and awakened all the love that I felt, that we were creating this field of love together. Love is as love does, and that's what really is important to me right now. And one of the gifts that of this practice is that it reminds us that all beings, the neutral beings, the beings that we don't know, all sentient beings, animal life, ourselves included, are worthy of compassion, are worthy of kindness, are worthy of love, just like me. You want to be free, just like me. You suffer too, just like me. You wish to be free from suffering, and all living beings share these wishes. So metta breaks down the separation. Love is that sane and sensible response to the world. We're close to time, but I wanted to offer a passage from Sharon Salzberg's Heart as Wide as the World. And Sharon Salzberg has written several books on metta and is really one of the leading teachers of metta practices. And in this book, she has a little chapter that I'm going to read called Prayers at the Western Wall. The Western Wall in Jerusalem, once known as the Wailing Wall, is considered to be one of the most holy sites of the Jewish world. It is part of the retaining wall of a historic temple built in the 2nd century BCE. There is a sacred custom that involves writing a prayer on a piece of paper and placing the paper in a crack somewhere in the wall. When I was in Jerusalem, I went there to place my prayers in the wall among the others. I followed this custom in the spirit of prayer most meaningful to me, that is, without addressing a supreme being or using a tone of beseeching, but rather in the spirit of metta, the practice of loving kindness. Metta means inclining the heart toward the happiness and safety of all beings and directing the power of our intention in the realization of that aim. So on my piece of paper, I wrote out my prayers for friends who were sick, friends whose parents were dying, and so on, and put it among all the others in one of the cracks in the wall. The next day, when I went back to the Western Wall, I noticed that my piece of paper was still up there, which seemed amazing considering the hundreds of people who put their prayers in the wall each day. For some reason, it seemed to me to be a good portent that my paper hadn't fallen out or been knocked to the ground. I returned the next day to check the wall again. This time I wasn't quite sure that I could spot my own little yellow piece of paper with wishes for the happiness and well-being of my friends, and I left feeling somewhat disheartened. When I went back on the 4th day, I was even more upset because now I definitely couldn't distinguish my particular paper from all of the others. Had it stayed up there or fallen? On the 5th day, when I went back, still worried about my piece of paper, I knew it was hopeless. The wall was covered with thousands of other bits of paper, all bearing prayers. I would never know what had happened to mine. Then suddenly I realized how unreasonable my fixation with my own particular prayers had been. All at once, it didn't matter whether I could distinguish my prayers from all the others. Each prayer in some way echoed every other prayer. Each one of us who had gone to the wall had expressed our own version of the universal primal urge toward happiness, toward peace, for ourselves or for those we love. No matter what the particulars, we were all actually saying the same thing. It no longer mattered whether I was looking at my paper or at the paper of any other person. My wishes were reflected in their prayers, and their prayers were reflected in mine. No matter how we pray or in what language, no matter what religion we practice, if any, no matter what country we come from, all of us fundamentally want the same things: to be happy, to be safe, to be free. That day, standing before the Western Wall, the universal cry of all beings wanting to be happy, including myself, rose up in one voice. So Sharon Salzberg from A Heart as Wide as the World. So metta, metta, metta. I talked a lot about metta, and would love to open the floor for any questions or comments, and anything that you'd like to share at all. Most welcome. And if you want to explore this practice, everyone is always welcome at the Friday Metta group, and that's at 4:30 and goes till 5:15. And I also want to say that Jokai is offering a morning of practice on June 15th. That's a Saturday morning, and I believe it's 9:15 to 12. And so please come for that if you'd like to. That's an in-person event at the Meisel Center. And then we'll offer one in July and I think August too. So we're trying to do these every month. And maybe when we get into the fall, we can do even more in person things, but always with our Zoom presence as well. So maybe just as we close, just taking a moment to appreciate your own practice and your own intentions toward kindness and wholeness and healing, and joining that energy with all of us here this evening. Joining our merit, as it's called, this goodness, joining our goodness, our practice, and our hearts to wish that all beings might be free and all beings might be at peace and all beings might feel love and be loved and able to love. Okay, dear friends, I look forward to practicing with you soon, and thank you for your kind attention and thank you for your practice.